This article is very interesting to me. This is from the strategybridge.org. The headline is Dime with a capital I, not dime with a small I. The dime coming from Clausewitz, diplomacy, information, military, economy as instruments of power. The headline says Dime, not dime with a small I, time to align the instruments of U.S. informational power. It's very interesting to me because I work in the information industry, starting as a journalist in middle school and have continued on until old age, actually. So this article was actually published in June 20th, 2018. It's a bit old. Donald Bishop is the author, and he says the officers I teach at Marine Corps University have long absorbed that American power has at least four elements: diplomatic, informational, military, and economic, and they use the shorthand DIME. When they think of the instruments of informational power, however, what they call to mind is military information operations. Their response tells a much larger story. First, U.S. informational power is much larger than military information operations alone. Their thinking also signals that the several instruments of U.S. informational power are hardly acquainted. The challenges to American leadership and the international order, whether from nations like North Korea, China, Iran, and Russia, or from Islamism, runaway nationalism, terrorism, and disinformation, all have military, political, and economic dimensions, yes. All these adversaries, however, propagate their ideas that challenge the norms that undergird peace, stability, order, democracy, and prosperity. Ideas must engage ideas, so it's time for the parts of the US government that deploy informational power to work together. Unifying them is a bridge too far. Something more simple, aligning, would be a good start. US informational power. The informational power of the United States mostly derives from higher education, the mass media, entertainment, and film, advertising, U.S. content on the World Wide Web, libraries, museums, non governmental organizations, endowments, and foundations, and the growing status of American English as a world language. Unlike American military and diplomatic power, however, this informational power is not controlled, directed, or guided by presidential administrations, national security agencies, or military commands. Four instruments of informational power are available to the U.S. government: public affairs by the White House and executive departments, the State Department oversees public diplomacy, information operations conducted by Armed Forces commands, and five international broadcasting networks under the Broadcasting Board of Governors: the Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Radio Free Asia, Radio and Television Marti, and Middle East broadcasting networks. There are several reasons why military students fail to consider the larger sum of informational power. On one hand, informational power and its elements have not properly introduced in the officer accessions program and professional military education. The larger reason, however, is the four instruments are not unified, synchronized, or even coordinated. That is, there's no one button to push. They have different authorities, appropriation streams, boundaries, lanes, rules, and doctrines. None have been funded to play in the big leagues. Sometimes they argue. Even more telling, practitioners in one field are rarely aware of what others do in theirs. Initiatives, plans, and operations that integrate all the instruments of informational power can be more effective than those that rely on military information operations alone. So, these divisions innervate U.S. information power. They narrow responses to foreign policy and national security challenges. Public diplomacy. Public diplomacy in the State Department includes media relations, web presence, education and exchanges, conferencing, publications, cultural diplomacy, promoting study in the U.S. and English language programs. Supplementing these traditional programs is a new unit, the Global Engagement Center, charged to lead the U.S. government's efforts to counter propaganda and disinformation from international terrorist organizations and foreign countries. Although one diplomacy expert recently judged that the center has never achieved the takeoff stage. New funding provided by the National Defense Appropriation Act should energize it. If this seems a sprawling array of programs, all are directed toward U.S. goals, seen through the State Department's integrated country strategy process. All public diplomacy activities informing, advocating, persuading aim to advance U.S. national interests and policies. Different programs have varied far, mid, and long term effects that parallel the military concept of shaping. While State Department's public diplomacy officers know U.S. military commands practice something called information operations, they have characteristically leaned toward distrust of the concept. Foreign service officers have gained firsthand knowledge of the armed forces during their tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, and Special Operations Command deploys military information support teams to a few dozen U.S. embassies. But co-location has not fostered a sense of collaboration nor overcome public diplomacy's unease with information operations. The disquiet partly parallels the concerns of public affairs officers over deception and psychological operations among the functions of information operations. Resort to either would damage credibility. Compared to deployed military teams, the work of public diplomacy sections is usually unclassified, and it is fully attributed. Some foreign service people apprehend that information operations teams' knowledge of a foreign nation's policies, society, culture, and sensitivities are shallow. The cursory treatment of information operations in public diplomacy training also is a contributing factor. The Broadcasting Board of Governors. The 5 networks under the Broadcasting Board of Governors broadcast in 61 languages, from Chinese, Russian, and Korean to 16 African languages. Shortwave, though still useful to reach a diminishing population of audiences, it is a smaller portion of the technical mix, which now includes AM, FM, television, online channels, and multimedia social networks. Access to the internet and applications is on the rise. Many users around the world tune into U.S. broadcasts via more than 3,000 affiliated stations. Local broadcasters around the world highly value the Broadcasting Board of Governors training program for their journalists. The language services known local societies, government media controls, and flows of information between home and diaspora communities. They apply the professional standards of journalism to their reports, features, and talk shows. They are not America's version of Russia TR or Sputnik or the China Global Television Network. Congress and every administration since 1942 have committed the U.S. networks to truthful and accurate journalism, and statutory and policy firewalls guard their independence. Even so, they are an important instrument of national power. Leaders of the Broadcasting Board of Governors, assuming additional resources, have set a goal of 500 million users weekly, up from the 278 million today. Department of Defense. As the U.S. faces new challenges and threats, national security and foreign policy thinkers join the media and the public in sensing that information, disinformation, weaponization of information, propaganda, hybrid warfare, cyber warfare is moving into the center of the conflict. Thus has fomented debate within the Department of Defense. Information operations include electronic warfare, computer network operations, operation security, military deception, and psychological operations. These last two make public diplomacy and public affairs practitioners blanch, but they need to rather join than turn away from the debate. Scholars and practitioners much discuss terminology, with different specialists and different commands preferring influence or strategic communications. The Marine Corps now uses operations in the information environment. The public affairs and information operations specialists in the Department of Defense are well trained in their schoolhouses, but in my experience, they exemplify a culture that incentivizes going it alone. Unaware of parallel work by others, they miss opportunities for cooperation. Few armed forces practitioners, for example, understand how to make working with an embassy a route to success. Public diplomacy at an embassy in its public affairs section already has contacts in the media and society, knowledge of local patterns of communication, employees who understand different social and political groups, and bilingual staff. The embassy can flag local sensitivities and brief commanders who present to the press. The public affairs outcome for a visit or a deployment will always be better if it is worked together with the public diplomacy people at the embassy. What's true for public affairs applies for information operations as well. An alignment agenda. Understanding the need to integrate informational power into grand strategy, many advocates reforming the U.S. Information Agency advocate reforming the U.S. Information Agency. During the Cold War, the U.S. Information Agency was the government's leading instrument of informational power. After the fall of the Soviet Union, however, its budget and programs were rapidly curtailed as part of the peace dividend, and in 1999, a shrunken U.S. Information Agency was folded into the State Department. Their Voices of America and other U.S. international broadcasting networks were placed under a new Broadcasting Board of Governors, further dispersing America's informational power. The new organizational arrangements have engendered their own vested interests and turf protection, which now slim prospects for necessary congressional action. These political realities mean that unifying the four instruments may be a bridge too far, but perhaps alignment is possible. The first steps in an alignment agenda are easy ones. The National Security Advisor or Secretary of State must take the first step, convening those who lead the instruments of informational power under the Undersecretary for State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs, the CEO for Broadcasting Board of Governors, and the Commanding General of the U.S. Army Special Forces Operations Command among them. Once alignment begins, ideas should move from the bottom up, but the process can only be launched from the top down. As Plutarch said, nothing makes the horse so fat as the king's eye. An initial, highest level meeting. Each organization can discuss how it addresses a threat or an issue, preparing the ground for working groups, consultation, and planning. The low-hanging fruit can be addressed first. Public affairs, public diplomacy, broadcasting, and information operations must educate one another in their professional schools. Exercises and simulations need role players from all four informational communities. Personnel experts can arrange exchange tours to strengthen unified action in the future. At embassies, alignment means ensuring cooperation among all the embassy sections with information, awareness, education, and exchange programs. Readying for the future information environment. 9/11 revealed the challenges facing public diplomacy. Its ideological skills were rusty. It had not previously engaged publics animated by religion. Its informational technology platforms were outdated. Older leaders did not foresee how transformative the social media could be. It was unprepared to address online radicalization, younger audiences, Russian disinformation, propaganda, and the kind of cyber accelerated information warfare seen in Crimea, Ukraine, and the eastern borders of NATO. Meeting the needs of public diplomacy in Iraq and Afghanistan crowded out forward thinking. New funds sources were scarce. Because public diplomacy is now housed in the State Department, moreover, it has been pigeonholed as a publicity arm of the Foggy Bottoms diplomacy, the D in DiME, diminishing its importance as an information instrument. Its traditional formulas telling America's story to the world, mutual understanding, and foundations of trust, capture only some of what public diplomacy is about. Considering it as a part of America's soft power, robust integration into national security planning, and embracing the DiME concept of America's national power can all upgrade public diplomacy's self-concept. All the instruments of U.S. information power must become stronger because of the surge of non-state actors in international affairs, the need to integrate advocacy and influence with more coercive tools of statecraft, and the urgency of again considering the war of ideas. The information environment of the 21st century will feature contested narratives, information blocking, Islamist social media, Russian hybrid warfare, and China's three warfares. Public affairs, public diplomacy, the U.S. government's international broadcasting network, and the information operations must face these together. Unaligned, U.S. information power will be defeated in detail, pushed back by aggressive information adversaries. This is a tall order, and more funding is unlikely, but there's plenty to do. First, Americans must think strategically about public affairs, public diplomacy, broadcasting, and information operations. DiME provides a framework. Alignment is the first necessary step.